Hello and welcome to the lecture on finally block. Let's understand how to use a finally block and what is the purpose of it. If you go to example 4 folder in handling exceptions, the logical flow is to raise an exception and execute the finally block. So you'll understand there's one more block called finally block and we'll try to do an example out of it. This is a file name that we'll create. Okay, so let's create that example. So there's an example that we have seen previously. I'm going to reuse this. Okay, we have set a custom handler to a method and then we throw an exception and then that exception is caught. Okay. Let's modify this program and understand how to write a finally block and what is the purpose of it. So what I'll do, I'll try to wrap this exception inside a try catch block. Okay, and I will write a block called as finally. Okay, there's no catch, means when there's an exception raised in the try block, it won't go to catch, it will go to the exception handler, right? But there is something called as finally block, and finally blocks are basically executed before the exception has been raised. So you can say this line is executed before exception. So that's how you basically define a finally block. It's a finally keyword and then you open and close the curly braces, and whatever you do inside this will be executed for sure. Means even there's error, there's no error, this block will get executed 100%. Irrespective of error or there is no error, this is the safest block where you can close all your open connections. You can, you want to set some variables to default, all those things you can do in finally block, because these blocks always get executed with or without exception. Okay, let's look at the example. Okay, you see this, there was an error, but the first line is executed before exception. So this will get execute and then it looks forward for any exception. So if you remove this and you run this, you will always see these lines get executed even there's a fatal error or any error. Okay, that's the power of having a finally block. It's a very important concept again in exceptions, because sometimes you open a connection with a database and maybe that connection is still open. Maybe you opened a file to read something and something happened during your program. Okay, now when you want to exit, you want to close that database connection or you want to close that file. All those things typically is done in the finally block, because this is the safest block and this will always get executed even though your program has error. Well, this finally block always get executed, and in this exception it will do it after this line has been executed. Okay, so the couple of points that you need to remember. To remember these points: finally block is executed before exception is raised, and even if you throw an exception, this is how you throw an exception, right? Even you throw an exception, this line gets executed. Okay, so remember this, the finally is basically a keyword used to write a finally block. When you raise an exception, whatever you write inside the program was executed. So that's what we have seen here. Okay, so I hope it's very clear how to use finally block. Well, that's on the lecture on finally keyword, and I'll see you in the next one.